Hello everyone, this is Bryan from RPG Site, and I just wanted to put together a quick little video about a game I've played recently, and that's 2017's Battle Chasers Nightwar. Now you might be wondering why I am more than a little bit late on this video, but as we all know, 2017 was home to a whole host of great video games, especially in the RPG space, so many of us didn't have a lot of time to get to absolutely everything we wanted to, and it's understandable that a few things just happened to fly a little bit under the radar. Now that we've got a new year and a little bit of breathing space, I finally had time to put together a few days and play through this game, which had intrigued me ever since I had seen it early on in a Nintendo Direct. Ironically enough, the Nintendo Switch is the one system the title has been indefinitely delayed for. But to kick things off, this is Battle Chasers Nightwar, developed by new developer Airship Syndicate and released on Steam, PlayStation, and Xbox late last year. Nightwar is an amalgamation of a lot of ideas from many different places, the standout obviously being the turn-based battle system reminiscent of the classic Japanese-style RPGs that we all played over a decade ago. It combines that with a randomized dungeon mechanic, and then a gear system that is most similar to something like Diablo. It's a blend of systems that might come across as a little bit messy, but it ends up coming together a little better than it maybe should. Primary gameplay loop is that you'll select 3 of the game's 6 party members and bring them along into the game's 8 dungeons. The dungeons are dictated by the linear story, but inside each of them is randomized, so you'll see a different layout every single time you enter. The dungeons themselves have an impressive degree of variety, including the abandoned husk of a town that's been overrun by bandits, going deep into a monster-infested mine, and then traveling through a snowy wilderness that's overrun by vampires. Inside each dungeon are, of course, battles to be fought, lore entries to collect, materials to gather, puzzles that will usually involve pressing switches in a certain order, and sometimes random events that'll be different every single time you enter. This degree of randomization works well for the game because you're encouraged to tackle the dungeons multiple times. When you enter a dungeon, you'll be able to select between 3 different difficulty levels, with the highest usually being too hard to tackle on your first go. Even though Nightwar sticks relatively closely to the classic turn-based battle system, there's enough wrinkles at play here to help make it feel not quite so outdated. The 2 I want to highlight are the overcharge mechanic and the selection of options that you get instead of a normal attack function. In most games like this, you kind of expect that your top option is always just going to be attack, which will just be some basic amount of damage, and that you select that if you don't want to cast a spell or do any sort of special technique. Here, instead of the 1 option, you end up with 4, so you might have one that does act as just a regular vanilla attack, but you might also have another that applies a condition, or one that does more damage if a condition is already present. Some instant actions will taunt enemies, forcing them to target a particularly tanky character, while others might generate overcharge. Now what overcharge is a mechanic that allows you to overcap on your general mana pool, allowing you to pull from that instead of depleting your mana as you partake battle after battle. Certain abilities will also do more damage or have more effects if a certain amount of overcharge is present. These sort of things don't reinvent the turn-based combat system obviously, but they're enough of a change that I felt like it was worth mentioning and helped give this game a little bit of an identity. When not inside one of the game's dungeons, you'll be traversing the overworld map, talking to different NPCs, shopping, crafting, the usual gamut of activities that you would expect in an RPG like this. The list of features isn't exhaustive, there's only 1 town to visit, there's only a small handful of side quests, but there's enough so you don't feel railroaded into just completing 1 dungeon after another without stopping. One peculiar oversight is that the 3 party members you keep in reserve do not receive any experience at all, so if you complete a dungeon with a core party of 3, you'll find yourself having to play catch up with your reserve party members if you want to keep them on a level playing field, which usually involves going through the dungeon a second time with your B party or just benching them throughout the duration of the game. Nightwar does a lot of things right when it comes to helping prevent things from feeling like a grind, such as the randomization of the dungeons, but when you have to go back and play the dungeon again on the easier difficulty just to get your party members up to par, it does feel like a little bit of wasted effort. I personally found found the general art style of the game to be pretty striking, with the comic book aesthetic being equally strong in both the 2D art and the 3D environments. Using comic book style stills for the cutscene direction isn't something altogether new, but it's paired here in a way that it makes sense. The voice acting wasn't incredibly impressive, but it wasn't bad enough to the point where it distracted from the experience. It's more just that it didn't really elevate the game in any way.
Oh no!
Golly, what? Golly. I've got you.
The story itself is a bit of a mixed bag. You see, Nightwar is the continuation of the Battle Chasers comic that was left unfinished in the 90s. What this means is that the main cast of characters already have a shared history which is left unknown to the player. The story told in Nightwar is mostly self-contained, but it does leave these threads to the larger world that most players are going to be left ignorant of. The story itself involves these characters crash landing on an island simply known as the Lost Continent, while here they find themselves wrapped up in the revival of an ancient demon, where they pair up with the blood mage Alumon to help stop the events from occurring. It's simple and straightforward without a lot of deviation, and mostly just serves as a vehicle to move the party from one dungeon to the next. There are a few cases where this appears pretty hackneyed, such as Alumon telling you to go fetch a key from the bottom of a mine, but it does what it needs to in order to keep the narrative moving forward. All in all these components come together into a surprisingly cohesive product, despite the fact that on paper it looks like it could be some sort of Frankenstein's monster. It's a game that I went into with relatively low expectations, being drawn into just based on the art style alone, but I ended up being pleasantly surprised. If in the first part of this year you find yourself with some free time and want to try a game that will kind of tickle your nostalgia bone but also give you something that's a bit unlike anything else, I definitely suggest that you give Battle Chasers Nightwar a whirl.